whenever we get talking really deep on the higher level consciousness stuff, it always I get these strange feelings, like it just doesn't compute with the menu of the day to day being here, and then just trying to transfer that awareness of something much larger. Man, it always makes my brain hurt a little bit. So I had a related question for something you were talking about in there is, I was wondering, have you met any beings that you considered that have super low entropy, and maybe even lower than yours if you can perceive that? And if you've learned anything from them, anything specific, and if they're all kind of highly effective, like being able to get things done, put in work, competent at their position, like what's the super low entropy, maybe the step ahead of you that you have some vision? What are those beings like,
Well, I'd offer up one example, and that would be the big cheese. Right? The big cheese is super low entropy, very big understanding, very big picture, kind of an individual. And he's been through the Earth cycles before, so he's probably not here now, but he could be, but he might do that again. So he has a bigger job, a bigger perspective, and he knows a lot more than I do, understands a lot more than I do. So yes, I know of others that are more grown up than me, and yes, they seem to be very competent, but that's not necessarily something it has to be, because there was a big cheese before this big cheese who wasn't very competent. No doubt he had a big perspective, but he kind of lost the bubble on it, which means that if you stop working on growing up, you start to de-evolve. So I suspect that he was once worthy of that position, and maybe for a long time did it well, I don't know. But for some reason, he stopped and just kind of let things slide. It's like, I'm God. I'm already God. What else do I have to do? There's no more courses. I've taken all the courses. I graduated the godhood. Now, what's to do? So if what you decide to do then is just kind of kick back and let the good times roll and just do whatever you think's right, well, eventually you'll start de-evolving. You always have to be trying to help, trying to learn, trying to grow. What can I do? How can I do it? You always have to be aware of others, what they're doing, why they're doing it. How can I help? And when you lose that, then you start losing your edge, and then you start losing your quality, and then you find yourself that you slide back, and you've got to relearn some things. So I think that even at that level, you can de-evolve. If you get to the point that you feel like you're done, I think that's a very bad place to be, is done. I think you have to always think that you have to keep going. So I don't think we ever get done. So yes, there are those entities that are very very low entropy. They do exist. As far as I know, this big cheese is very good in his job, does well, does a whole lot better. And so they're there. Now, how he interfaces with what's above him, I have no idea. That's too high above my pay grade to know. I don't know that interface, or what it's like, or how many other big cheeses there might be. I don't know any of that. That's not what I need to know. But now when I interface with him, no, he does not tell me things. He does not have classes and say, all right, everybody listen, I'm going to tell you the way it is. It's not like that. He, like everyone else who's grown up, tries very hard to never tell anybody what to do. Everybody's free will is inviolate. Everybody has to make their own choice. And he'll put me in situations where I have choices to make, where I have to figure out how to, I may even have certain goals to meet, but how I meet them and how I go about it and why I do what I do has to all come from me. So I don't get any instruction at all. Basically, what I get is a problem and a desire for a solution. And then it's up to me to deal with that in any way that I can. If I deal ways that are positive, that seem to lower entropy, or that are approved of, then I get another request. I'm part of the squad that gets requests and goes and does things. If I do it in ways that cause trouble and are dysfunctional, then I'm not. I won't get any more assignments. I'm not ready yet. I wouldn't be grown up enough. So it's that sort of thing. It's not, I don't get direction, but all of the choices you have to make are all those are your opportunities to grow. I don't get a lot of help in how to do it. I just, it's like, what is it? The Mission Impossible, right? And the little envelope that has your job in it, goes up in flames right after you read it. And, it's one of those things, a lot of music in the background. And it's like that. So here's what we need to do. Here's the problem. Help us solve it. And you go then do your best.
When you say goals, should you approach consciousness evolution with goals in mind, a goal-orientated view, I'd like to lose this amount of fear by this time, or, does that have a related metaphor?
Yeah, you can have some goals like that, but they have to be very high-level goals. They have to be goals that mean something. Like if your goal is to go out of body and to be able to go out of body whenever you want so that you can fly around and do really cool things, that goal is probably not worth very much. That's flying around and doing cool things. It's really not on your way necessarily to growing up, although you could use that as a lever to help you grow up, but not if that's where your focus is. So you can have some gain. Yes, I'd like to get rid of a fear, by the end of the year, I'm going to get rid of this fear I have, a feeling that I'm just going to work on it and work on it and work on it as hard as I can. And I want to get rid of it, in 6 months or a year. That's fine. But the goal has to not be rigid, because you get there in 6 months or a year and you haven't gotten rid of it and you're still struggling with it. Well, then you can't throw up your hands and say, well, I tried it for a year, I quit. That's not helpful. So any goal you have has to be very flexible, that you can move it again further. But some people like goals. They like specific targets to work toward. That's just the way they're made. They think and function, I think the word is very concretely. They like concrete things, markers, things to do. And if it's very abstract, they don't know where to start or how to begin. They don't and don't feel at home just in abstraction. That's basically why in my model I had to make a larger consciousness system as a metaphor for source, and I make an IUOC as a metaphor for us, and I make a free will awareness unit because that's the thing that has no background, doesn't have any intellectual background that that attaches to the avatar. So you make these things up, because otherwise it's all abstract. If they're all just conceptual, it's all wrapped up into a big abstraction. And then you end up saying things like, you're everything, you're God, go deal with it. And people don't know what to do. So by breaking it into pieces and giving the pieces names, you allow people an ability to work with them more concretely, like chakras. Just make these chakras. And now people have certain specific things they're working on. I'm working on my crown chakra. Now I'm working on my root chakra. And they can go focus on that, and it's more helpful for people to have some concrete nomenclature, concrete, metaphors for them to focus on. Because if it's just this one big thing and it's all abstract, most people won't have any idea where to start or whether they're making progress or not. They're just lost in a vast ocean of possibility, and it's hard for them to grow with that. That was sort of, as I was telling Eric, it's kind of my problem with God does it. It leaves you with the answer, but it doesn't leave you with a pathway, to improve yourself or to grow. It kind of leaves you at the end. All right, you're already at the end. That's just not helpful for most people. They can't deal with that level of abstraction. So yes, goals can be useful, not if they drive you, but if they focus you, then they're good.
Just saying it makes sense to me.
Tom, we've got a question from our friend Mario in Brazil, and what he's asking is to do with life experience packets, that is known as reincarnation to some. You use life experience packets as your metaphor for us coming back here and having other lifetimes. Now, you've mentioned that at a certain quality, you can choose what sorts of things you need to develop, and a lower quality would just come back and experience things. And he asks, how much do we participate in the process? Do we work out the details of what the life will be like? Not as much, but only what we would need to develop or to work on those issues that we need to work on.
That depends. If we if we are not coming here for a very specific mission, something that ties into what other people are doing, whatever it is, a very specific, which I would say your time here is almost scripted. If you're not at that category, if we're in the more normal average category that most of us are in, that our time here is not scripted. Our free will choices could bounce us in this direction or that direction, and we go in whatever direction they take us. In that case, you get about as much say as you want in it. But typically, what actually happens is that you have to come up with the idea yourself of things you're working on. The system will help you. Like, I'm weak in this area, I'm strong in that area. Let's work on the weakness. And that can be done with life review or just a discussion, or you may just already know that. You've come to those conclusions already. So you have that kind of input. Now, after that, if you have other suggestions, I'd like to be, a Asian female, or I'd like to be in a wealthy country. I've been poor the last 3 times. So I'm really done with poor. You may indeed get that done, just because it would then take that excuse away from you. You'd find out that it really didn't make any difference. Your ability to grow up is probably equal no matter where you're born or what race it is, because it has to do with you changing what's inside, not with what's outside for the most part. So there's things that you can do and say. If you make demands and say, I want to do this. No, I don't want to be a female again. I'm going to be a man next time. Well, okay, I've already been a man 1,000 times and a female only 20 times, but you can have it your way. In other words, nobody will say, no, you need to do this, you need to do that. You're never told what to do. Now, if you make poor choices, it'll just take you longer. That's all. So we can say things like that. Most of the time, people don't, because they've learned that when they do that, it usually doesn't work out as well. Then, how do you end up, with Susie and Joe in that family instead of, Sally and Bob in another family? How do you end up in a particular place? For the most part, you don't have any insight into that. You just say, okay, here's my goals. Here's the kind of things I need to learn. Give me an assignment. and you get an assignment, and there your free will awareness unit logs on, and there you are. So you trust the system because the system knows all of that. The system knows the genetics of each. It knows, the situation, and it can look at the probable future. So it has all the stuff that it needs to set up something that looks pretty good for you. Because there's free will, trying to set something up that's very particular just doesn't work well, because everybody has free will, and no matter what you dream up, it usually doesn't work out that way. They make their own choices, do their own things, and go off in their own way. So there's not a lot of planning that can happen there for the most part. So the average person just lets the system pick, but it tells the system the kind of situation it would like if they want. If they don't want, then they just let the system pick and place them, and they don't have much input to it, which is generally what happens when you're just beginning and you're just new at the business, and all you need is experience. You don't know enough to pick. The system will just pick something and send you back. So that continues until the point that you get interested enough in it that you exert your free will. But mostly, you don't have all the information that the system does. And you can't make, I shouldn't say you can't, but you probably won't make as good a choices as the system will make for you, because you don't know as much as it knows.
Well, that kind of leads into his other question, which is, how much help do you get if you have that level that you can choose certain situations for yourself? Does the LCS help, or do other beings that are assigned to that kind of thing help?
Yeah, well, other beings are just subsets of the LCS. If we won't have to try to, break it out into little pieces. It makes it simpler that way. If you just let all the other beings just be subsets of the LCS, like we are, we're subsets of the LCS. So let them be the same sort of thing. And you get as much help as you want, as you need. If you want to say, well, let's discuss this plan in a little more depth. I had this problem last time and that problem, and I want to avoid this situation and that situation. Nobody can promise you anything, because once you pop into the virtual reality, the cookie's going to crumble however it does. You end up with experience and choices, and everybody's making choices that affect you. You're making choices that affect other people. And in that mash, it's really hard to make a plan. Now, you can make some plans, the system can, if the system's willing to help you nudge that plan along to get it to fruition. And if you're going to be aware enough to let them nudge you. So you can have plans, but mostly it's not like that. But you can be as detailed or as general as you want, and the system will never make you do anything in particular. But most people have very little knowledge. They don't know what would be the best situation. I mean, how do you know what would be a really good learning situation? Well, you could say, hey, I want to be born in a wealthy country in a very benign situation where there isn't any violence or unrest and everybody's nice. Okay, so you do that, and after it's done, you die, and you didn't learn much anything at all, because there was very little challenge in your life. Well, that was nice, but now let's do something more important next time. So you're not necessarily looking for easy or for wealth or for particular situations. You're looking for growth. That needs challenge. You have to be challenged. How do you pick the optimum challenge in a system of free will? Very difficult. Let the system do it is the way most everybody does it.
All right. Well, we probably have time for one more question. And Eric, since you're here, if you have another one, we'll have you ask one. If not, we can go to the questions prepared. Is there anything else you'd like to ask before we leave?
Yeah, I do have something actually. Something that I've been thinking a lot about lately is that when you talk about low entropy beings, or generally in spiritual literature, when people talk about low entropy beings, they're often talked about in one aspect, which is that they are sort of um, transcendent in the sense that they're happy in almost any circumstance, and they're able to deal positively with anything, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't have a lot of they're basically sort of unconditionally at peace with things.
Mm-hmm.
And that does make sense to me, but I feel like there's a part of the picture that gets left out a lot, which is that if you describe beings in such a way, it very quickly creates this image of someone who um, doesn't have a lot of initiative or desire, I guess, to go out and create something or do something, or something like having a preference. It's almost like often the image gets created that they're sort of okay with anything, and it doesn't really matter so much. So this whole idea of preference and selectivity doesn't really get mentioned a lot. And for example, if we take a specific area, which is like relationship, let's say relationship to the opposite sex, it often you talk about that low entropy beings, they are sort of compatible with everyone because it's the fears and the needs that make you incompatible. So once you have no fears and needs, you can basically be in a healthy, functional relationship with almost anyone. And that does make sense, but I do feel like it leaves this image of someone who doesn't have a lot of passion or a lot of initiative or a lot of just character almost.
Mm-hmm.
And especially, like me being in a relationship, I know that if my partner would ask me, why did you choose to be with me? If I would respond like, well, you're just kind of the first person who showed interest in me, and I guess anyone will do. It's like, I guess I'm whatever. Like that's not really gonna fly, right? And
Right.
you also talk in your book about, Pamela being the one. I mean, there must have been a reason why she was the one and not someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if you could kind of shed some light on that aspect that often gets left out.
Yes, it's a common kind of misunderstanding that often people who grow up fall into. It's a real problem for people who grow up. It's a trap, so to speak. It's just like the trap of thinking that you're done. Then you start to de-evolve. Another word that's used for this is to say that you need to be detached. As you grow up, you become more detached. And then we think of somebody who's completely detached, and we think somebody that's just floating above the fray and isn't involved in anything. They're just up there, maybe chanting or going on or, sitting around in a meditative state all the time, but they're no longer really engaged in the world. That's not what that means when we say don't be detached, that you need to be not detached. What it means is do not be attached through your ego. Do not attach to things egoically. Don't attach to things with your fear. That's what that really means when they say be detached. Detach from your ego. Detach from your fear. Don't detach from your interest or from your excitement or from your passion. Okay. Well, the trap is that as you grow up more and more, everything is kind of okay. You're not upset with anything, even those things that are dysfunctional. You realize they're just part of the learning process. It's what people have to go through in order to grow up. So you're okay with everything being that way, but you still need to be looking for, how can I help how can I be of service? How can I create a lower entropy future? How can I create something, that will benefit others? What can I do here? And if you keep that in mind, then you won't drift off into kind of oblivious, drifting across, floating above everything because you're not connected. You will be connected. You won't be connected by your fear and by your ego. You're not going to say, oh man, how could those stupid people do that? Because that requires fear. Say things like that. So you wouldn't say that. You'd understand why those people are doing that. That's where they are. They haven't grown up any more than that. And they're learning and doing things based on who they are at the moment. And you'd understand it. So you wouldn't be angry with them. But you may want to say, well, people that do those kinds of things really need this or that you could be helpful. They need to understand these other things. How can we do that? How can we help them feel better about themselves so they can get over that? See, you are attached. You are engaged. You are planning a function. You have purpose. And that's the way it should be. Because you should never grow out of being helpful. But now that the trap is that those people who kind of aren't upset or angry about anything don't really get engaged. They just stay up there and say, oh, this is nice. It's calm. It's peaceful up here. I think I'll just relax and enjoy this. And then they kind of sit still and don't do much other than maintain their rarefied, position of guru or whatever. And they do exactly what you're saying. They kind of drop out. And at that point, they've lost the bubble. But that's a trap. Just like believing that you're done. Oh, I'm enlightened now, so I'm done. That's a trap. You're never done. And yes, you do get to a point where you're not angry. You're not fearful. You're not upset. Nobody can push your buttons because you don't have any buttons. You understand everything. But you still need to be engaged, plugged in. How can I help? What can I do? How can I serve? What can I do to optimize the lowering of entropy, optimize people getting along with each other and seeing bigger pictures? And those people should stay active and connected. And if they just drift off into that, oh, it feels so good land, then that's a trap. They will begin to de-evolve until one day they'll say, damn, those people, they shouldn't be doing that. And then it'll be, uh-oh, what happened to me? I shouldn't be getting upset about this. And then they'll have to work themselves out of a little hole they've let themselves fall into. So that's the point. And yes, people do get lost there, but they shouldn't. So it's not a part of growing up to become a vegetable at the top, floating uncaringly around while the people beneath you are all in a scuffle. That's kind of arrogance. That's not really helpful. And when people who get into that, it's really an error, not a good place to go.
Yeah, I think there's there's a lot of sort of Buddhist teachings out there that talk about desire being a bad thing and being sort of the root of all suffering. But I think, and I wonder if you would agree with this. Maybe it's a good way to state it is that desire is not the problem, because desire can be love driven instead of fear driven. So it all comes down to, is a desire driven by love or fear?
Exactly. It's not the desire is not the issue. It's the intent behind that desire. Is that intent one toward building a lower entropy world, helping others, or is that intent because it's convenient for you or feels good for you, or you like being on top and everybody else being beneath you? That's a status position that you want to hold. So yes, that's the case. What's right and what's wrong are defined really by the entropy trail they leave. If in the long term, the entropy result of your choice is that the entropy is lower for everyone, for the whole system, then that was a good choice. And if entropy is higher for the system, that wasn't such a good choice. If you make choices that aren't so good, then you learn from them. It's not a problem. You just learn from them if you do that. So yes, it's we always have the choice. We always have the choice, and it's our intention behind the choice that makes it right or wrong, good or bad. And that intention has to do with the entropy calculation. And like all entropy, is that when you do nothing, if you just sit and float and glide, you start to de-evolve. Entropy just starts to increase on its own. It requires constant effort to maintain.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you clarified that, because for me, I do feel like I ended up sort of in that space and it didn't feel so good. And also just what I ended up with a lot of times is that I did have a desire for a certain thing, and that it's then very easy to think, oh, just because I want something, then that must not be good. Whereas that's not necessarily the case.
No. Yeah, people, when they get to the top of anything, often, one of the choices they have is to choose arrogance. It's so great to be at the top. Now I've arrived, kind of thing. And they feel done and they feel accomplished and they're arrogant about it. That's people who have stopped growing and are now de-evolving when they get to that position. And they feel right. And they feel like they can tell everybody else what to do and how to be because they know, because they've made it to the top and they understand. So let me tell you what to do and how you should be. And of course, all that is wrong. You don't tell people what choices to make. Everybody has to make their own choice. You give people their free will and you realize that they have to make choices that are meaningful to them, not make choices that suit you. Otherwise, they can't grow from it if they're not making their own choices. So, yeah, that happens. You get to a point where you feel like, okay, I'm floating on top. Nothing bothers me. I'm flying high. And if that feels like a place you want to stay, then you've lost what the point was in the first place of getting there. And usually that comes crashing down as one day your perfection crumbles in a very painful way. You realize that life isn't at all the way I expected it. Where is all this joy and peace that I should have gained over the last 5 years of meditating 3 hours a day? Now here I am, and the joy and peace isn't there. What's wrong? Well, you were interested in the end point, not so much in the growing up as in the wanting to be at the top of the pile. If it's a competitive thing that pushes you to the top, it's generally the wrong reason. So that's unfortunate, but there's little what did I say in the book? Little pieces of poison cheese that are laid around, in the most conspicuous places for people who think they're wiser than they are, in order to get their feet back down on the ground. So yes, there's little pitfalls, and they're at the top as well as at the bottom. Rats at all levels are still learning, and you can fall into a pit at the top of the heap, and you can fall into a pit at the bottom. You always have to be aware of your choices, what they are, and why you're making them. What's the intent behind that choice? And when that intent is serving a very, self-serving or self-righteous goal, I want to be the best, or I want to be above it all. I don't ever want to be angry. That's really not the right reason. You want to grow up because you want to be helpful, because you care. and being angry gets in your way. So it's why you do the things you do that's more important than what you do or where you go. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
We have one question from the MBT forum. This goes back a bit because we've been stacking up the questions from MBT forum. It's from Johannes on climate change. He says he used our MBT search engine tool and couldn't find anything on this subject. Now, I know we did a video called Altered States of America, where I think when you were at the Monroe Institute, several of you saw changes in the shape of the United States. Can you speak to climate change and maybe what you saw there, and has anything changed from that?
Well, everything's changed. Everything always changes. But climate change is a real thing. You know, it's not a political stunt. It's a real thing. You know, the temperatures are rising, most noticeably in the Arctic. And though you might say, well, who lives in the Arctic? Why should I care if it's, you know, 3 degrees warmer in the Arctic? Well, that affects all sorts of things. You know, our flow in our oceans that deliver warm air to some places, like the Gulf Stream, delivering warm air to you folks in you know, Europe, Western Europe. You know, you depend on that cold water up there in the north sinking and then flowing back toward the Gulf where it warms up and goes up more to the surface and takes that heat up there to you. Those kinds of things that create our climate depend on all the pieces of the climate. So if the poles are having a change that's dramatic, it's going to make dramatic changes everywhere. The whole environment, the whole ecosystem is all interconnected. It's not like all the piece parts are separate. And we don't care if the icebergs melt because why should I care about an iceberg? You know, I don't need an iceberg. And, you know, what do the icebergs do for me? You know, that's a very short-sighted viewpoint. So anything that changes, even a small amount, can have terrific effects. And these effects are such, they're so big. We're talking about so many quadrillions of, you know, of gallons or cubic meters of water and so on. It's not something you can change. It's not, you can say, well, let's get our refrigerators out and just cool that pole down. You know, we'll take care of it. You're talking about stuff so massive that there's just nothing we can do about it. And if we stop warming it up, it may take, you know, another 30 or 40 or 50 years for things to settle out. When you're talking about our weather patterns and the you know, the climate, these are big things that take maybe centuries to settle out. You know, something happens and you'll see repercussions of it, maybe even a millennia afterwards. So not stuff you can just change because you want to, and now it's become inconvenient. So you have to really think ahead and say, what are we doing now that's liable to wreck things in the future, and we won't be able to take it back? Because it took us, 500 years to create the problem. It'll probably take us another 500 years to solve the problem, if the problem even can be solved. So, yes, you know, the climate problem we have is very important. And the fact that we have global warming is a real thing, and it's very important. And it's something you don't want to get wrong, and it's something that you can't wait until it's a crisis to do something about it. Because by the time it's a crisis, there's nothing can be done about it, probably for a century. You know, that's the problem. If you wait until the crisis happens, then it's too late. So that's the message. That's why you find a lot of people saying, you know, we need to do things and do things now. And other people look around and say, you know, okay, it's a little warmer in the summer. I like the winters better. They're a little milder. What's wrong? What's the matter with what we got? That's just extremely short-sighted. You know, that's there's a lot of things could be wrong. You have to look at the little warning bells way in advance to try to do things. Now, what the climate scientists tell us, if we already passed the point of being able to turn it around, The global warming thing is going to give us some pain, because we needed to have done a whole lot more than we did, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago was like the tipping point. If you go past that without having met these goals, then, you're going to pay for it downstream. And we've already passed that point. So we are going to have some more severe prices to pay with the weather. Now, how much longer we're going to drag our feet because it hasn't pinched us yet, because we haven't gotten, to the emergency. What do they call it? There's a management style, leading by crisis. You wait for a crisis, and then everybody scurries around, and tries to fix it. If there's no crisis, then there's no reason to scurry around and fix anything. Let it ride. That won't work when it comes to global things. That might work in a business office where 20 people work, but that's not going to work with our climate. So we do have to be a lot wiser than we've been. We have to communicate to people how serious it is. And we have to convince people that if they're waiting for the crisis to happen before they do anything, that they won't like the result. Right now, we've been trying to do that, for 20 years? Wasn't this whole thing kicked off by, Vice President Gore, Al Gore?
Yeah, Al Gore.
Yeah, kicked it off with a speech, and that's probably 20 years ago. I don't know. I just made that number up, but it's a long time ago. So we've known about it, and we basically, because they don't have any crisis yet, we haven't done a lot about it. We talk a lot. We yammer, but we don't really get too serious. And we probably won't get too serious until we see the crisis is starting to happen. And then we'll get serious. And then we'll have another at least 50 years of it getting worse before it starts turning around and getting better. And it's going to be a lot of dislocation and flooded properties, and places that were nice and comfy now too cold to live in, and places that were nice and humid now are too dry. And we're going to have a lot of issues to deal with. So I think for the most part, people ought to just realize it's going to be a rough hoe, because we human beings do not have the wisdom to act in advance to help ourselves. We're just not that evolved yet. We're not that smart. We have to wait until it hurts before we will even, make it, realize that it's a problem. So that's been the case so far. And if that continues to be the case, then we'll wait until it becomes a crisis. And once it becomes a crisis, we'll deal with it. And there'll be dislocation, and there'll be deaths, and there'll be people, who can't get food and can't get water. And we'll have all that to deal with for 50 years or so. So that's the deal. So we either wise up and do something serious, or we wait and watch it and see what happens. It's all happened before, right? We can see the climate changes. We've gone to hots and colds, and the Earth's magnetic field has flipped and flopped, times, and all this stuff has happened, but it never happened with a population of, 8 million humans living here in big cities that require all sorts of services and food to be shipped in. And we've never been in that situation. All these things happened when there was maybe very scant life, and maybe, not even humans. Humans only go back to 200,000 years. So, a lot of these things have happened before, but this time it's going to be different, because there's going to be a lot of unhappy humans on the butt end of that if we don't get serious.
The honeybees are in a crisis as well.
Yeah.
And I think Einstein made some kind of comment about that. But speaking of agriculture and food, if that becomes more severe, that's another type of crisis as well. So I hope there's a lot to do that salvages the honeybees.
Yeah. Well, the way that works is that it's all tied up together. You don't have these big system problems that don't create a whole lot of other problems. So there's going to be lots of other problems that get created. The bees, I believe, I've heard that it's primarily chemicals. And then I've heard that, no, that's not the case. It's some kind of a parasite that's infected the bees. And so whatever it is, that's just one more problem. And as the environment gets inhospitable to bees or to anything else that's important in our environment, then we'll have to deal with it as that happens. So yeah, there's a lot of things. I mean, right now, the people who are in areas that are going to flood aren't worried about flooding. Once water gets ankle deep, then they'll be concerned. That's just the way humans are. Maybe we'll learn something from this, but yeah, I support the ideas of climate change, and I support that we really need to do things and get serious about it. But I don't know that we will. I'm not sure the human race has evolved enough to be that cooperative. We'd like everybody else to solve the problem. We wouldn't have to do anything if everybody else in the world would just solve the problem for us. So that's the whole point of growing up, right? Living together, having to make choices, having to work together and be cooperative. Well, we're not very good at that yet. We don't think as a species. We only think as individuals. We don't see ourselves as species.
It seems like that's been a theme of our culture too as we grow up, like hurt ourselves until there's absolutely no way that we can't deny we're not hurting ourselves, like lead pipes or lead paint, asbestos. Doctors were prescribing cigarettes. I mean, it's like until there's absolute equivocal proof, we are smashing ourselves in the hand, like we don't want to do anything about it.
Well,
maybe that's just us growing, right?
Yeah, not if it's profitable to some. If it's very profitable to some, then they want to keep that profit rolling no matter the cost. So it's damaging to others. But yeah, that's not people who are really caring and cooperating. That's people who are out for themselves. As I say, we're not quite grown up enough to deal with these things. But the things that we have to deal with keep getting bigger and bigger. And will we as humans grow up to the point that we can cooperate and care enough about each other that we can actually solve them? Or do we have to be drug kicking and screaming through a lot of horrible stuff before we wise up? Do better next time.
Well, with corporations, Tom, there's a duty to the shareholders. There's no ethical structure that is anything but making a profit. Until that structure changes, none of that is going to change.
Well, there's always been an ethical structure. It's just not embodied in laws. There's always been ethics. It's always unethical to hurt people. It's always unethical to cheat and lie, and steal. All those have always been unethical. But those ethics have not been turned into regulations or laws or anything. So people can do these things with impunity. So yes, that's part of growing up, of us caring about each other and being cooperative rather than trying to take advantage of each other for personal gain. Until we grow up, we're just going to drag ourselves through problems. That's all. We'll just have to deal with it. A lot of the mess we see in the world right now is just the result of the things you're talking about. Well, now we get to live with it. That's what makes people grow. They make choices. They make mistakes. If they recognize the mistake, they get a chance to learn from it. They don't recognize the mistake, they get to do it again and again.
Yes, well, thank you, Tom. I think living through these troubled times may make people more aware, perhaps, that we need to work on things and make better decisions. And like you always say, that starts with us individually. We're going to wrap up this 83rd Fireside Chat. Thank you, Jens, for reestablishing it for us, and for Adam for co-hosting, and Eric and all of the others for all of your questions. This was a lovely tribute.
I try to say most times at the end, all of you remember Oliver and be sure to hit the donate button and help Oliver pay for the expenses. So now let me shift that to Jens. You know, this whole platform doesn't just get along on its own. It takes some resources to pay for it and to keep it working. Even if most of the time is volunteered, there's still some hard currency needs to flow to make this thing work. So ladies and gentlemen out there, please find the donate button on the, what is it still, Matrix Vision? Is that still the, yeah, okay, on the Matrix Vision website, and help Jens and Tim and everybody else who's trying to pull this together, kind of help them out with the expenses. That would be appreciated.